Okay, another Saturday live study. Folks, we are going to do a very quick recap of last week because we talked about the muscle fiber type. So I'm going to share my screen and let's have a look. And remember from last week, let me get this up so we can expand. So, no questions from last week, right? Mimi or Francette? I know Rialto, you just started.
Mhm.
And guys, if you got questions, that's the whole point of doing this live lecture study. Is if you've got questions, stop me and we can discuss it. Okay. So real quick, remember there's three muscle fiber types generally that every muscle in your body contains. Right. So every skeletal muscle in your body contains all three muscle fiber types in certain percentages. Now, funny thing is that the human muscular system, unlike other animals, the human muscular system is predominantly made up of type 1 muscle fibers. Okay? So humans are really more type 1 endurance type animals. I know the strongest men on the planet can squat. I think it's 1,100 pounds now or 1,050, some ridiculous number. Deadlifting. But human beings are not really in the animal kingdom. We're not really designed for power. That's not only because of the muscle fiber typing percentages that we have in our muscles, but also because of the biomechanics. We're not biomechanically really well designed to um, to lift really heavy weights. We are more designed for endurance, believe it or not. Of course, there's a lot of variation amongst the different human populations on the planet, but you guys got the point, right?
Mhm.
um, that when we look at humans in general and compare humans to other animals, so comparative anatomy, we find that humans, we're squishy, we're
Mhm.
softer,
Mhm.
okay, and we just do not have the same power capability. What's up, Jimmy? It's great to see you, sir. Um, and that is predominantly due to the fact that human beings are, again, predominantly in general type 1 muscle fibered animals. All different muscles in our bodies, of course, have different percentages, but and I'll give you an example. Hmm, let me think of a good muscle. How about this? Your calves. What are the two muscles of the calves? The gastrocnemius and the soleus, right? So when you look at your calf muscles, right, you can see that diamond shaped muscle that's what we call the calf. That's called your gastrocnemius. Now the gastrocnemius is predominantly slow twitch with a fair amount of fast twitch fibers to it. Whereas the soleus muscle, which lies underneath, and it is a postural muscle, is 60%, 65% of even higher in some cases, depending on the person, type 1 muscle fiber. It is a endurance capable muscle. It is designed for postural control, whereas the gastrocnemius literally rides right over it. It sits right on top of it, is more designed for propulsion and power type movements. Y'all get it? So muscles that we look at in the core and in and around the joints, especially the spinal column, that are responsible for keeping you in proper postural position or postural control tend to be higher in type 1 muscle fiber percentage. Again, even the muscles that we call high power contractile capability, power output, even those muscles like the biceps, the triceps, the pecs, they're still roughly 50 to 55% made up of type 1 muscle fibers. And of course, we see variations from person to person, and it only takes a couple of percentage difference in type 2X or type 2A versus type 1 muscle fibers to make men, I'll use men as an example, to make certain men look even more massive and more muscular. It doesn't take that much of a difference in percentage. So the question is always professional bodybuilders, right? Are they genetically advantaged, most of them? And the answer is absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, the use of anabolic androgenic hormones makes a significant difference, but the starting genetics has a lot to do with how those individuals ultimately will look after they've trained for years. Same thing with other high level athletes, such as track and field athletes. You don't just, you guys, track and field, yes or no? Who follows track and field? Yeah, right.
Oh, I
You
was
don't
raising
just,
my hand, but I wanted to ask a question.
yes,
You
go
can't
ahead.
change the muscle fiber type that's in your muscles. It doesn't change, right? It is what it is.
Yeah, no, the actual fiber typing is genetically predetermined. But a more important question, Mimi, it's a great question, is can you create adaptive changes to those muscle fibers? And the answer is yes, but not all of them. Generally, the ones that are most adaptable are the type 2A fibers. And type 2A fibers, like we talked about last week, are predominantly middle of the road. You know, they call them pink fibers because they do contain a fair amount of myoglobin. So, how could you make a type 2? Now, remember, type 2A are fast twitch. So, the neurological connections are coming from fast twitch neurons. Okay. So they are fast twitch. They are receiving a very high frequency of action potentials, which is why they can conduct a high level of power. But how could I make a type 2A muscle fiber more endurance capable? If I was able to do it, what do you think I should do if I wanted to make a type 2A muscle fiber more like a type 1 muscle fiber? What could I do?
Cardio?
Yeah, but be more specific. Now, be more specific at the physiological level. What do I do to the fiber itself? Add more.
Protein?
Oxygen? But
Oh, okay, France. I'm going to do the yes, but take a step back. How do I get more oxygen into a muscle? What does a muscle fiber have to have in it in order for oxygen to be utilized as a precursor to ATP?
the mitochondria?
Mitochondria and myoglobin.
Yeah.
Myoglobin, right? Okay, myoglobin is the oxygen carrying molecule inside the muscle fiber. And yes, myoglobin obviously will transfer the oxygen that it's holding to the mitochondria ultimately. But guys, the point is that from a purely physiological perspective, if I can get a type 2A muscle fiber to stop working under heavy loads and heavy resistance, but make it work for a longer period of time, over an extended period of time, I'm going to force an adaptive change to those fibers. The reality is that type 2X fibers contain almost zero. They don't really contain mitochondria and myoglobin. They don't need to, right? Everything they do is glycolytic, right? It's all conversions of sugars, glucose directly into ATP. So you can't do a whole lot with type 2X fibers, can you? If I want to make them more endurance capable, but because type 2A fibers have the metabolic capacity to adapt, you can quote convert. They will never become type 1 fibers, but they will start to look, act, taste, feel, and behave like type 1 fibers. Are you with me? What if I did just the opposite? I didn't do any cardio. Everything I do is pure resistance training with heavier and heavier weights. What can I now do to the type 2A fibers? I can actually adapt them to become more of what they already are. They're already type 2 fibers, right? They already have the neurological capacity to have increased levels or higher levels of action potential stimulus. And if I don't do cardio, right, if I don't do endurance activities, then how much of the mitochondria, myoglobin is actually going to be used by the type 2A muscle fibers? Not a lot, right? So, Mimi, to answer your question, yes, I can make type 1 fibers become less a component of the activity if what I'm doing is uh, training specifically for that type of activity. That's why marathon runners, a marathon runner, how much type 2X muscle fiber activity does a high level marathon runner actually need? Nothing. In fact, to the marathoner, type 2X muscle fiber activity is actually in a sense, not it's a little taking it a little bit over the edge here, but it's unnecessary. You just want your type 2X muscle fibers to just go away. Just don't worry about it, right? Because type 2X muscle fibers always bring along lactate development, lactic acid conversion into lactate. So a marathon runner does not want to get, any level of acidic components into their blood because of type 2X muscle fiber usage. Does that make sense? So the marathoner just wants to use their type 1, type 2A that have been adapted more towards endurance type activities. I hope that makes sense. And by the way, even that's a very simplistic way of understanding it. But that's probably the best way to kind of focus on this. And Mimi, trust me, ain't a whole lot of any of that going on with the average person. When we talk about muscle fiber adaptation from a neurofiring action potential stimuli perspective or adaptive changes to certain muscle fibers to become more endurance capable, we're talking about very high level athletes. So does that make sense? Kind of, sort of. Um, why? Because there's more to it, obviously, than just what's happening in the muscle fiber itself. But the point is that from last week, I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that you got these three muscle fiber types. Every muscle in your body has all three fiber types. So therefore, from a exercise perspective, it makes sense, okay, that if you're dealing with the average person, the average client, it makes sense to train all different ways, right? High repetitions, lower weight, along with moderate and heavier, quote, heavier weights for that individual, right? On a sort of routine basis. In other words, when you're training clients and you're doing dumbbell curls and bench presses, don't just do 20 repetitions, 25 repetitions every time they train. I'm sure that's okay. That's better than nothing. But the recommendation is because they do have different muscle fiber types, we would also incorporate sets of 15 reps, even 12 reps. Now, I will say just from a safety perspective, I never go lower than 12 to 15 reps with most clients, maybe 10 depending on the client. Does that make sense to everybody? See, because if I add increased resistance, if I add more weight to the dumbbell curl, which muscle fibers now need to become more engaged and more active in that movement? The fast twitch muscle fibers. We use different terms like low threshold, high threshold fibers. The heavier the resistance, the more force that needs to be produced in a movement, the more engagement we see of the type 2 muscle fibers, both 2A and 2X. Y'all get this?
Mhm.
You see how that information alone can help you when you're actually training people. It can help you in your own workout. So we normally say, let's do a lot of everything. We will spend more time on the higher and moderate repetition range and occasionally throw in heavier training, but that's because of other issues related to safety and joint stability. Make sense? You'll see a lot of this when you move into your NASM and your ACE when they talk about the use of resistance training for postural control and stability. So there's a sequencing that those two they like to use in their models. What we say is do a bunch of different things with the emphasis on muscle endurance. Does that make sense, everybody? You sure? Jimmy, you're giving me that look like you got it, right? Okay. So again, the idea then as you read through this, you can see the different characteristics of the muscle fibers. Um, Remember, this is just the muscles. We're going to talk about here the skeletal system, which brings in the safety aspect of this. So this is academic, very interesting. That's great. If you're a power lifter, you need to train this way. If you're a marathon runner, if you are doing resistance training in the season, generally they're doing off-season stuff, you train this way. Okay? So today, let's talk a little bit about the skeletal system. Now, one of the things you do not have to do, I don't recommend it, it's not necessary. You do not have to memorize a whole lot of bones and the names of bones. Now, we do want you to memorize the names of muscles. Okay? You should know the superficial muscles, right, of the body, the biceps, the triceps, the deltoids, the latissimus dorsi, the pectoralis, the abdominals, the internal, external obliques, right? The rectus femoris. Now, the quadriceps, you should memorize all four of those muscles, hamstrings, calves, yada, yada. But when it comes to the bones, we're not in an anatomy physiology class. You don't have to memorize. Now, I guess it's not a bad idea to memorize the, bones of the legs, maybe the femur, tibia, fibula, the humerus, right? And the ulnar and the radius bones of the forearm. Probably not a bad idea to know that. But trying to memorize all the bones, it's just unnecessary, folks. And what is really important about the skeletal system that we need to know? The key here are the joints. Now, remember, we want to talk about materials that are related specifically and very closely related to the actual business of training people. You got it? What is really, really important when you go to train the average person, the average client with resistance? What's one of the things that you could potentially have an issue with? Joint problems, yes? Okay. And so we need to understand that the skeletal system, for our purposes, really we focus on the joints. And the movable joints of the body are called synovial joints. And again, we are paring this down to only those joints in the body that we're using on a regular basis, especially when we are training people. What are those joints generally going to be? The elbow, the shoulder, the hips, the knee, the ankles, the wrist, I guess. We're not worried about the phalangeal joints or any of, right? We don't care about condyloid joints and all. You'll see all that when you get to NASM or ACE. They'll talk about them. Okay. But for us, we're more interested in those major joints of the body, right? Where the main superficial muscles of the body work over. Is everybody with me on this? Yes? So synovial joints, everybody's familiar with the word synovial? Yes, maybe. Okay. Synovial referring to synovium, which is the actual liquidy gel-like material that's located in the joint capsule, which acts as a lubricant and a nourishing agent to the joint itself. So you can see here, synovial joints are where two or more surfaces articulate, right? That just means they come together, right? And when I say two or more surfaces, we're talking specifically in this case, generally we talk about the knee joint, right? What bones are involved in the articulation of the knee? Well, you got the femur, the upper leg bone, and the tibia, right? So the tibia is one of the smaller bones of the lower leg. But there's also a very small bone that runs alongside the tibia called the fibula. And the fibula actually connects up against the tibia. Now, technically, that's not attaching or articulating with the head of the femur, but we kind of group it together because those three bones are involved in knee flexion and extension. So we say joints where two or more surfaces articulate with the potential for creating movement. It's about as simple as it gets, right? And then normally the synovial joint is surrounded by what's known as a joint capsule, and that insulates and protects the joint structure and internal components. Is everybody with me on this? I'm just asking you to look at what you would normally understand about a joint. This is where I like to talk about how many of you eat chicken? How many of you ever bought a raw whole chicken? No, you just buy it already cooked, Francette? You ever dissect a
Let's cut
chicken?
up, I guess.
You
Or
already get it cut up.
yeah,
All right, your
Oh,
homework
I mean,
your
my
homework for
mom,
next week
they
is to
take that.
buy a whole chicken and do a little and have a little fun with it. But if you ever look at a chicken, it's really cool. The raw chicken, if you like cut the the thigh and the leg, that's the best place to do it. If you look at how it articulates, you'll notice that if you cut through it and you break it open, you will notice these articulating surfaces of the bone. Same thing with humans. These, and by the way, these synovial joints, they can be really, really strong. Now, they're really strong because of ligaments, but the point is that these joints have to be very well protected in order to move through the different movement patterns they go through, right? So if you take a chicken leg, for instance, and you break it open and you got this other side, you will notice there's a lot of material in there, not just the muscles. Okay. You'll notice that the head of one, the ball joint, right, is very smooth, very smooth. And that's what's known as hyaline cartilage. You guys have heard of cartilage, right? I'm hoping
Yeah.
some of these terms start to really make sense. Well, technically it's called hyaline cartilage because there's multiple types of cartilage in your body. We talk about just the hyaline cartilage because that's what caps the surface of articulating surfaces. Okay, very smooth. It's relatively firm and hard, but it allows for a lot of ease of movement of the joints inside the joint capsule. So again, I'm trying to bring this all together into a simple way of explaining it. You've got two articulating surfaces. That's where a bone meets another bone, and they are protected by this very unique compound known as hyaline cartilage, which allows for a incredibly smooth surface, very easy to articulate with very little friction. How many of you have ever heard of what's known as the coefficient of friction? You ever heard of that term? Coefficient of friction. It relates to the amount of heat that's generated when two surfaces rub together. If the coefficient of friction is very high, that means that it's pretty rough. A coefficient of friction that's really low means that it's a very smooth surface with very little heat generation. Well, that's the way your joints are, and cartilage provides that that very, very smooth, easy to articulate surface. So the joints themselves come together inside the joint capsule, which is basically just connective tissue that essentially surrounds and encapsulates the joint itself. There is a substance known as synovium or synovial fluid. I guess if you look it up or you Google it, I'll just tell you right now, most folks will describe it as raw egg white consistency. Does everybody know what a raw egg white is?
Uh,
An egg white, it's almost like it's squishy and jelly. Like, well, that's what synovial fluid is essentially like. It's actually pretty remarkable liquid, and it just ensures that there is as little heat generation as possible when your joints are moving, right? So when I do this, I can't have a whole lot of heat being generated in my elbow, a lot of friction being generated, and it would cause inflammation. So we have synovial fluid inside these joint capsules to ensure that heat generation is minimized. We have hyaline cartilage that surrounds these articulating surfaces to once again ensure the lowest possible levels of friction for heat generation. Why is this important? Why is all of this that we talk about important? Because of injury potential. Remember, for the vast majority of people that I've ever trained, it's not generally the muscles that can get hurt. I mean, you can hurt them, of course, if you pull them, but we don't use a lot of weight when we're doing a lot of exercises. The joints. How many of y'all have joint issues in some way, shape, or form? Most people have some level of joint discomfort. Not sure what it's caused by, but if you're training people, you have to be very, very careful about your ranges of motion. So we talk about the skeletal system and joints because we're concerned about potential injury, and the injury is generally caused by, get this, the range of motion of the exercise and the amount of resistance that you're using. Now, I would think that most of you are comfortable enough when you're doing your training, you're doing a dumbbell curl, for instance, that you don't lock your elbow at the bottom of the movement. Who would agree with me? Don't lock your elbow, right? I hope you raise your hand and go, no, no, no. Well, why not? Why don't you lock your elbow? And it's just using this as an example. Why would you not lock your elbow at the bottom of a movement of a dumbbell curl when you're holding a 10-pound dumbbell? Because intuitively, you know that if you do this and lock out or bounce into it, what's going to happen to your elbow? It's not going to feel right, right? Well, yeah, if you add resistance to this movement and come down and lock the elbow out, because of the mechanics of the elbow, you are going to put undue stress on those structures we've just been talking about. And one of the main structures that we're concerned about is what? The ligaments, right? So when we talk about joints and the skeletal system, we are really interested in ligaments. Now, if you look down here at the bottom of the page, what do ligaments do? They attach bones to other bones. They essentially hold the skeleton together. In the joint, in and around the joint, we also have a number of other structures. Tendons, and what do tendons do? They attach the muscles to the bones. Now, of course, I've thrown in some other terminology here. Fascia is just thin sheets of collagen-based connective tissue, covers and separates muscles. Now, y'all see these words? These are important words to remember. Epi, peri, endo. Epi, peri, endo. Say those over and over. Epimysium is what? What is the epimysium? It's connective tissue, right? It's connective tissue. It's made up predominantly of collagen. Collagen is a protein, right? It's the most abundant protein in your body. And no, it doesn't mean you should be taking collagen peptides and consuming collagen proteins. It's not how it works, folks. Just that's a whole nother conversation. So what is this collagen-based material going to do? What is the epimysium? It's the fascial covering over the muscle belly. It surrounds the entire muscle belly. It acts as a protective sheath between the muscle itself and any of the surrounding physiological structures, fat pads, things like that. The perimysium surrounds what? The fascicles. Remember, muscle belly, fascicles, muscle cells or muscle fibers. Y'all got that? Some of this stuff is just rote memories. You just got to memorize it. So epimysium surrounds the muscle. Perimysium surrounds all of the fascicles. And what does the endomysium cover? Muscle fibers, individual muscle fibers, right? So when you think about it, if you look at a muscle, just the muscle itself, there is a lot of this connective tissue in the muscle, right? I mean, you got a sheath covering the whole muscle. You got all of these fascial coverings around all of the fascicles, and then right down to the muscle fiber itself, all of the fascial covering around muscle fibers. That's a lot of connective tissue, isn't it? It really is. Now, this is what is important before we end this today, is to understand the concept of a tendon. Remember what we said, tendons attach muscles to bones. But here is the misunderstanding in general. People will generally think that you have muscle bellies and then they are super glued to tendons, and the tendons are super glued to the bones. That's not what it is, folks. Tendons are the actual totality of all the fascial material that surrounds the muscle cell, fascicles, and muscle belly. So essentially, the tendons are just all that peri, epi, and endomysium inside that muscle coming to the edge or outer areas of the muscles and forming into these very, very tight, very high tensile strength structures known as tendons. Got it? So again, the muscle belly, the fascicles, and the muscle fibers all have this fascial collagenous material inside the muscle, and that all of that material, as it comes to the end of the muscle, forms into these tight, very, much smaller, obviously, than the muscle belly, but very tight, very strong tensile wise, right? You can't pull them apart real easy. Structures known as tendons. Again, I am going to refer you back to your raw chicken friend that you purchased. And go ahead and look at the ends of muscles, and you'll notice these white opaque structures that connect the muscles to the bones. Does everybody understand that? You know what I'm talking about now? Yes?
It's like when you buy the chicken tenders, like the
Yeah, that's right.
the long skinny, when it's frozen, it has that white connective tissue like on it.
Guess what that is?
What
That's
is that,
that's
a
the
tendon?
tendon. Yeah, because remember, muscles come in all different shapes and sizes. There are pinnated muscles, uni and multi-pinnated muscles, where the tendon is runs along the transverse section of the muscle. There are strap muscles where the tendons are at the very end. And yes, believe it or not, if you go to a butcher, are we really talking about butchers and chicken and stuff? Yeah, I mean, this is the reality of it. It's easy to see it. If you go to a butcher and they're cutting like meat for you, what will they try to do? They'll try and cut off all the what? The silver skin stuff, that stuff that's really tough. Well, that's just fascia. And then if they cut into the meat itself, you will see these long areas of white, firm, very tough structures, and they'll try and cut that out for you. Those are tendons. For the most part, they're tendons. And sometimes tendons run along the entire length of the muscle. Sometimes they're just at the ends of the muscle. Again, don't like to go too deep into that element of muscle physiology. For us, what's important to understand from a training perspective is that generally, not all the time, but injuries can occur because you're using too much weight and you're using an overextended range of motion. We'll talk about range of motion as we get further through module 1, but it's important to understand that understanding the skeletal system from the perspective we just talked about is critical when it comes to actually dealing with people and doing exercises properly. Does that make sense? Okay. So what did we do? Get through one slide, Francette? Was it one slide we got through?
A few.
Was this helpful though? Does
Yeah.
this help make sense a little bit? Rialto, remember, if you got questions, because the other folks have been on here before, if you got questions about what we talk about here on this video, and by the way, anybody else watching this video as well, if you've got questions, please reach out and let me know. I'm more than happy to help everybody. Again, another great Saturday study. Please reach out and we will see you next Saturday. Yes?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
thank you
Okay,
so much.
folks. Have a great weekend. We'll talk later. See ya.